Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Outcomes. I have a really awesome guest today. Joakim is actually someone I've known for quite some time, and he is the former chairman, member of the board, and partner at Avidly. Avidly is, just for context for those listening, HubSpot's biggest partner and a really awesome success story. I know I don't talk about HubSpot a lot in this show. I frankly intentionally don't do that, but I think from an ecosystem perspective and thinking about true partner alignment and true, really, frankly, impressive growth trajectory, what these guys and gals have done is really unique. So first and foremost, my friend, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Barrett. This is great. It's good to hear you when you explain it like this. It sounds like, wow, that sounds pretty good.
I mean, you're doing something well. Here's the thing. I could go down that rabbit hole. We will in a second. Before we do, I got to do the thing I always do, obviously. We talk about what partnerships means to you. And so I asked you the question. You said it's an in-depth business relationship where we align and share goals, business opportunities, and profits with our partner. Profits is actually new. I haven't heard that said before. So do you want to keep it the same? Do you want to change it? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to some extent, if you see how it reflects you as a person, we are just extremely authentic, because when you go at speed, you want to be as transparent as you possibly can. And then if you then go back to the values that we go into a market with, it is everything from doing good stuff, creating impact, but it also to doing business. We want to make sure that we grow profitably. We build a business that's really sustainable. So that's where the profit part comes into it. So whenever you do a partnership, we also need to do good business for ourselves and for our partners. That's the only way we can sort of sustain over time.
Yeah, I like that call out about the sustainability over time, because you've been in the program now. So let's go back, I don't know, call it to the inception. I want to talk about how a business like yours, because you don't have, like, you weren't an agency owner or whatever, if you would call it, before this. You didn't really have like an SI firm. You've got a business background, finance, and a variety of other things. That to me is interesting, because you clearly chose this ecosystem as your target opportunity and leaned in really heavily. And you are the most successful partner in the history of the program, to date, and have done an exceptional job in doing what you just described, which is outsized value in return for the way that you're working within the business. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, from someone I admire, certainly, the way that you've done this. How did you go about just the early days of targeting this specific ecosystem as the right opportunity for you?
Yeah, I guess you should start by taking out the word "you" there, because when we start that, you realize that, okay, I can add one certain element to make this a success, but then we need so many more capacities to make this happen. So it goes back to the background where I was. I've been telecom for 20 years, telecom and finance. And that's sort of a business area that's always measured everything. You measured in detail whatever you do, everything from how you price things and how that pricing hit the market, how you sort of received to the market. And you learn that sort of metric mentality all across. And then I became a CEO of a startup where we built up a mobile operator in the Middle East. And you realize that, okay, we can do metrics on a lot of things. Where we never could hit sort of the right in the metrics is on, how do we spend the money when it comes to spending marketing money, and seeing how much do we get in return for those. So when HubSpot came along, which was the software we looked on, we saw that's actually a really interesting piece of software that can do wonders. And at that time, also my wife worked at a company that we're using that software, and we said, okay, maybe this is an interesting software. Start to look into the ecosystem. Extremely fragmented, lots of small businesses, and very driven supplier of that software that had some great audacious goals. So we said, if you're going to do this, let's make sure that we become a significant player in that space. So then we just made sure we took a deep dive into what that ecosystem looked like. We met a lot of people beforehand and decided, okay, this is the ecosystem where we want to go in and take a lead. So if we're going to do this, we want to be number one. We said that really from day one. And that was around 2017 was when we made that decision.
That's so interesting. So for listeners, it's 2023. We're recording this. It's April-ish. So in context, in a very short period of time, they become one of the most successful partners, again, in the history of the program. What I'm fascinated on, though, is you specifically said something that I talk about in the show, I talk about personally, I echo this idea of observing an intersection of problem. So you were talking about, I have a startup, I'm going to market, I'm trying to figure out how do I market better, and then more specifically, how do I get tangible, measurable ROI to action on that marketing and be effective. You find a software, you do a little research, and it turns out that software has what you would call a partner program, but the opportunity lied in, it sounds like the sophistication component, right? So just to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, what you're describing is very specific intentionality around going into the program and saying, I'm going to do this in a programmatic, a systematic, if you will, way, an intentional way to go and grow to be number one. Is that a fair thing to say?
That's really fair to say. And if you have a background in, like myself, in sort of telecom, which is super process driven, where you build up into a launch situation where you want to load on maybe, 1,000 of clients every day, you need to be able to serve those clients in a really efficient way. So you need to build up everything you do around a process without being robotic. So you need to understand the flow for every business stream that you have in the business. So
that's interesting.
So also starting super small, we try to set it up in the same way.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to jump over you, but that's really interesting. So you're talking about coming into this with a specific plan. Was there an operating model that you admired or had learned from outside of, it sounds like because your telecom experience obviously informed your mindset, your methodology, the way that you approach this. But, as everyone knows, going to market from an industry like telecom to then, more of a services agency model, an SI, reseller, co-servicing model, it's very different. So I'm curious how you made that transition, and if there's some sort of a framework or even a book for that matter that you used to begin that process.
Not necessarily. Of course, I mean, I'm a little bit older than most guys in this industry. And then what happens is that you've gone through a lot of books, you've gone through a lot of different business models, and you come to realization at the end, sort of the business logic is very similar across different industries. So as long as you get that business logic, you can sort of apply that to pretty much any industry. Then, of course, you might have different sort of channel strategies. You might have different sort of way to approach and go to market sort of ideas. There's different skill sets you need, but sort of the overall arcing business concepts are very similar. I mean, you have to understand your total addressable market. What's your piece of that share? What's our offering compared to competitors' offerings, and how do we put our skill sets in front of clients to make the greatest impact, and how do we ensure that we always do well at the client so they stay with us and we can build on those, on top of that adding new ones coming in. So as a framework is pretty straightforward and simple, and when it comes down to the execution, it's just extremely tactical. So you have to go down to a lot of details by setting this up. And that's here, I guess, is also the other key, I would say, is that you never build a ready plan. You start with a good enough plan, and then you have to be audacious enough to step into it and just, okay, let's start executing. And as you execute, the first step really is, okay, so we don't have this in place. Let's build it now to the best of our ability. Let's see what's been done elsewhere. We connect a lot with other partners in the system. We try to and transparently ask, are you guys okay that we use whatever you are using? Because we think this is great. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
So just to build on that, and then try to get sort of that mentality across all of our people. So we are always trying to sort of force ourselves to improve.
It's so interesting because you're talking about then, you made the comment of audacity. I know I asked this idea of like a go-to-market superpower, and it comes up sometimes. You mentioned audacity, execution, passion. That framework, that mindset, I think it's we use this sort of like a devalued term of like a growth mindset I've heard before, which I think is fair. I mean, it's sort of it's a label, but what you're talking about is something more than that. It's a boldness. It's a desire to go and, to your point, also in terms of saying not fully baked, like just go and do the work and learn as we go. Do you think because of that you've been successful, or do you think that like that's just the starting point that got you rolling, if you will, down the hill, and that your continuous, what sounds like learning mindset, really, like your desire to go and grow from what's around you, that's actually what's led to your success?
I think it's really, that's what led to our success, but that's also where, I can still say that we are really just in the beginning where we want to be.
Sure.
So we started off like that, and pretty quickly you see when you start your business that you realize, okay, that you bring in the first client, then you get the second client, then you build on that, etc. So we see, okay, this is how we can sort of, how fast we can grow organically and add on new clients, and then find new skill sets come in to support us. At some point you realize, with the sort of audacious vision we said, okay, let's say we want to be 1% of our partners' revenue totally. That's a big number. If you're going to reach that number, let's say we want to do it in 3 to 5 years. That's an enormous number. And then you can say, okay, that's not going to be possible. Or we do the other way around, where we say, if we're going to be there, the speed we're going at now is not possible. So we are doing something right, but we need to add more elements into this. So that's why we need to strengthen our assets, which means that we probably need to be able to put some more capital into the business. We had to add an inorganic arm into it. So how do we actually add on other partners to come in and with the same mindset, the same belief, the same sort of view what's going to happen over time?
Well, we should talk about that because that's interesting. You're talking about specifically capitalizing the business and then using that capital to go to market and acquire, partner with, work with other organizations. How do you, I mean, I've talked to folks in M&A quite a bit in my career, and that's almost like this, holy grail is the wrong terminology I would use. Like the sort of like North Star is a better expression perhaps, where I think for a lot of folks, I mean, it's logical perhaps. Like you, I read a lot and I think a lot about sort of the fundamentals and, a bit of an aside to the point I'm going to make in a minute here, but there's this conceptual thing I've read about more recently, and it has to do with psychology and a few other different disciplines. But they talk about how the ability to recognize patterns in your life, in your relationships, in your interpersonal connections in business, and then through that recognition, be able to, when you recognize it, then use the programmed response to your advantage. Meaning, like for example, if you ever walk in a room and someone says, "Hi, how are you?" You say, "Good, how are you?" And they say, "Good, how are you?" You do it 3 times. We all do that because we're programmed when someone asks that question to respond back. But when you get to a point where you can harness that power and be intentional in terms of knowing that there is this pattern that is going to take place, that you can then manipulate the outcome when you get better, kind of more aware is what I'm describing.